Breaking, the world is rewriting the rules. Not allies, not equals, not real partners. Syria sends a cold signal to Moscow. Russia may be forced out of one of its military bases. Trump suddenly backs down. Tariffs on Europe are suspended as Greenland turns into a card. And the Greenland crisis shakes the EU to the core. Europe is now openly questioning life without US backing. Old alliances are cracking, power balances are shifting. You're watching Ukraine Today with user Slava Kolesnikova. Stay with us, it's only getting hotter. Not allies, not equals, not real partners. More and more the relationship between China and Russia looks like master and subject. Despite years of Kremlin talk about brotherhood and equal partnership, the balance of power is clear. Beijing is in control. While Moscow insists the relationship is manual and beneficial, China is quietly setting the terms. Is this friendship or depends dressed up as diplomacy? Stay with us, details ahead.
Not friends, not partners, but master and subject. That's exactly how the relationship between China and Russia has been described lately. And as you might have guessed, the power and authority are in Beijing's hands. Even though the Kremlin insists year after year that China is their brother, friend, and partner.
Our relationship is equal, mutually beneficial, and not opportunistic.
The People's Republic of China, our relationship with it is of an unprecedentedly high level. There is mutual trust. China is our strategic partner and ally.
In reality, however, with each passing year, Russia increasingly resembles a vassal of China, a raw materials appendage, or a profitable asset, at least for now.
China has effectively made Russia its junior partner. And sometimes Russia even acts almost like a proxy for China. And this also needs to be understood.
Another nail in the coffin of relations between the countries was Putin's silent acceptance of the fate of his Venezuelan partner, Nicolas Maduro.
We call on the American leadership to immediately release the legitimately elected president of the independent state and his spouse.
This, you could say, was Russia's only reaction to the events in Venezuela. But the absence of Moscow's usual tirade about how bad the West is not the only reason for China's doubts about Russia. According to The Times, Beijing has begun to doubt Russia's reliability as a partner, since it believes that Russia and the White House had some kind of agreement. According to
the source interviewed by the publication, the Russian authorities did not share their assessment of the situation in Venezuela with the Chinese. Nor did they inform them about the decision to withdraw their diplomats and their families from Caracas at the end of December. As a result, China was caught off guard by the operation of the American Special Forces. All of this caused irritation in Beijing and sparked heated discussions about the relationship between China and Russia. In some circles, there was even speculation that the silence of the Russian air defense systems in Venezuela during the American raid was not a coincidence, but a sign of cooperation between Moscow and Washington, according to The Times.
Now, people are saying that Xi Jinping will never forgive Putin for losing Maduro and therefore for losing Venezuela as well, with all its resources.
There were economic calculations based on Venezuelan oil. China even built a huge oil refinery specifically designed for Venezuelan crude. There are differences there. And basically, that refinery can only process this type of oil. And it's known that Russia supplied its air defense systems to Venezuela. And after the fact, when the Americans carried out their special operation in Venezuela, it was captured, Maduro. And let's remember one last thing. That there were quite a lot of Russian mercenaries in Venezuela. There was even an entire Russian general who trained the Venezuelans in the art of war.
But that's not the main reason for the cracks in Russia's relationship with its eastern neighbor. As they say in Beijing, Russia has seriously damaged China's relations with Europe.
Although Russia's isolation due to the war in Ukraine has brought China economic benefits, the costs of the two countries growing closer are also obvious. This was noted in an interview shortly before Maduro's capture by Professor Jiaxing Guo. He is the former dean of the School of International Studies at Peking University and one of China's most influential strategists. Among such costs, he cited the deterioration of current and future relations with Europe, adding that resolving the conflict in Ukraine would be beneficial for China.
China is considering this option, despite the fact that it was the war that turned Russia into their vassal. At one time, China became something of a lifeline for sanctioned Russia, a partner, but more like a raw materials hypermarket, where everything is 50% off. Even within the Russian government, there have been several anonymous statements saying that China is simply using Russia, and that this is exploitation, not partnership.
This is the current China. It is ruthlessly turning us into a raw materials colony, crushing our real sector with a flood of its own goods, while we provide only raw materials. Guys, it wants to keep us in a half-strangled state.
But today, that economic profit cannot make up for the damage that friendship with the Russian Federation causes to China.
The nation of China is now beginning to reap significant benefits from this ongoing war. Let's recall the issue with the military exercises in Belarus when there was a provocation. Russian drones against Poland. And Poland closed its border, while 10% of Chinese exports to Europe go through Belarus.
Therefore, it seems that Beijing has started to distance itself from Moscow, including economically. For the first time in 5 years, trade between China and Russia has decreased.
From January to November, China reduced its purchases of Russian oil by 7.6% to 91.5 million tons. At the same time, in monetary terms, exports collapsed by 20% due to falling prices and discounts, according to experts from the Gaidar Institute citing Chinese customs data. China's imports of petroleum products decreased by 3% for light distillates and by 33% for heavy ones. Deliveries plummeted by 33% and 40% respectively.
Oil trade is barely staying afloat, though even here, everything is unstable. China sometimes reduces oil imports from Russia and sometimes increases them. China's interest is sustained only by the record low price offered by Russia.
Russia sells oil to China and India and does so at a significant discount, according to the latest data. In fact, the price of Russian oil in China reaches as low as $36 per barrel. And at some oil fields, that's even below production cost. So, in reality, China's profiting off its ally.
Another blow to Putin was China's refusal to buy Russian electricity. Commercialsat reports that imports of electricity from Russia have been completely halted, despite the contract. And that's because energy from Russia has become too expensive for China. There are zero benefits from the contract. Moreover, China reacted very calmly to the alleged drone attack by the Ukrainian armed forces on Putin's residence. And that's simply because they just don't care at all. Russia and China don't really maintain very partner-like relations, even in the Central Asian countries. Beijing has long set its sights on what Russia considers its spheres of influence, and is actively deepening its ties with the countries of Central Asia.
In the eyes of the Central Asian countries, Russia is an unreliable partner. And indeed, China is becoming increasingly active in its expansion. You know, in Russia, they like to call this region Russia's soft underbelly. And lately, China has been moving in there very actively, especially into Kazakhstan. And what's important and interesting is that after the start of the large-scale invasion, Xi Jinping paid a visit to Kazakhstan, where the joint declaration following the visit resembled more of a warning to Russia regarding possible expansionist plans. As if to say, Kazakhstan's national security is China's national security, and so on.
The Kremlin doesn't have the strength to compete with China, so Putin even swallowed the fact that after 27 years of discussions, China, together with Kyrgyzstan and Uzbekistan, is building a railway to Europe. But it's not just about economic and strategic interests. After all, China has also set its sights on Russian territory, specifically the resource-rich Far Eastern region. But in exchange for perks from China, Putin is ready to swallow even this. This is confirmed by and by the fact that a couple of years ago, Russia practically gifted 2 islands to Xi Jinping, and now has allowed large-scale deforestation around Lake Baikal. That's why today, China is effectively absorbing sanction-dependent Russia, which has long since become nothing more than an asset for Beijing, an asset that Xi Jinping uses as leverage in negotiations with Europe. But as soon as this stops being beneficial for China, the geopolitical game with Russia will be over.
Syria signals Russia to leave when base may be shut down. The Syrian government is preparing a sensitive move. Damascus is planning to formally ask Russian forces to leave one of their 3 military bases in the country. If confirmed, this would mark a serious shift in Syria-Russia relations. Is Moscow losing its grip even on long-time allies? And does this signal a border rollback of Russian military presence in the region? Stay with us, more details ahead.
The Syrian government is planning to ask Russian troops to leave one of their 3 bases, the airfield in Qamishli.
The Russian military forces and their strategic commanders in the region
are negotiating with the new authorities in Damascus to keep the other 2 military bases in Tartus and Khmeimim. At the same time, Russia has withdrawn a significant portion of its military equipment from Syria.
We maintain relations with all the groups that control the situation there, as well as with all the countries in the region. The vast majority of them tell us that they would be interested in having our military bases remain in Syria.
The new president of Syria has been unsuccessfully requesting Moscow for about a year to extradite the ousted dictator Assad and provide financial compensation. Meanwhile, Assad leads a secluded and luxurious life in an elite penthouse in Moscow City. He spends most of his time playing video games and studying the Russian language.
Thank you that despite the traumatic situation in your country, you nevertheless responded to our request and came to Russia.
As you know, Bashar Assad fled from Syria. He took a huge sum of money from that country and secretly smuggled it abroad. We want those who are protecting him to return him so that he can be held accountable in Syrian courts.
Furthermore, we shouldn't forget that before the coup, Putin called the current Syrian authorities terrorists, and for years Russian troops helped kill Syrians.
2 bases have been established here and will operate on a permanent basis, in Tartus and here in Khmeimim. And if the terrorists, if they raise their heads again, we will strike them with blows they have never seen before. In just over 2 years, the Russian armed forces, together with the Syrian army, have crushed the most capable group of international terrorists.
Now, however, Putin has changed his tune very quickly and declared that, as it turns out, it was Russia that helped put an end to terrorism in Syria.
Even those groups that once fought against Assad's regime, against government forces, they too have undergone internal changes. It's no coincidence that today, many European countries and the United States want to establish relations with them. If they are terrorist organizations, then why are you getting involved with them? So that means they've changed, haven't they? And that means, to a certain extent, the goal has been achieved.
They even had to accept Syria's new leader and hypocritically pretend that everything was going as it should.
Throughout our history, we in the Russian Federation have consistently maintained that we have never established or held any form of diplomatic relations with Syria that were contingent upon our internal political climate or fluctuating domestic situations, nor have they ever been driven by narrow, self-serving special interests or hidden geopolitical agendas. For all these decades, we have always been guided solely by the interests of the Syrian people.
Perhaps it was precisely the active stance of the US and Europeans that led to more radical actions against Russia. After all, sanctions were lifted in Syria, and President Trump strongly supports the new government.
He's a very strong leader. He grew up in tough conditions, so he's a tough guy. I like him. I get along well with him. And we will do everything possible to help Syria succeed.
The new president of Syria, of course, says that he does not want conflicts with the Russians and is ready for dialogue.
Syria and Russia have had strategic relations. We cannot end this quickly and want to develop our joint strategic interests in the future. Any relationship will be focused on the interests of security and independence of Syria. That is why we are not in a hurry to expel Russia from Syria, as some people think. We have already opened channels of communication with them. We do not want a serious conflict with any other country.
But it is obvious that Syrians remember exactly who killed their loved ones and wiped entire cities off the map with carpet bombings. Entire cities. That is why they will certainly not miss the chance to pay back the real terrorists, the Russians, in kind.
Trump backs down. Tariffs on Europe suspended over Greenland deal. Donald Trump has announced that the US is lifting tariffs on European countries that were set to take effect on February 1st. The reason? An upcoming agreement tied to Greenland. Did Europe give Washington what it wanted behind the scenes? And is Greenland becoming a real currency of global deals? Stay with us. Details next.
He imposed them himself, and now he's canceled them himself. Trump announced that he is lifting tariffs on European countries, which were supposed to take effect from February 1st. The reason for all this is the upcoming agreement on Greenland, which the United States is hoping for. Thus, after meeting with NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte, US President Donald Trump announced the formation of a framework for a future agreement on Greenland and the entire Arctic region. He wrote about this on his social network, Truth Social. Trump called the meeting with the head of the alliance very productive, and also noted that additional discussions are underway in parallel regarding Greenland's Golden Dome. Further information will be provided as the discussions progress.
I think something will happen that will be very good for everyone. No one has done more for NATO than I have. I think we will find a solution that will make NATO very happy, and we will be satisfied as well. But we need this for reasons of security, national security, and even global security. This is very important.
At the same time, he noted that this agreement provides for mining rights for the United States as well as for NATO members. According to some analysts, these Greenland deposits are also the basis for Trump's desire to own the Green Island.
I think that in principle, all this, let's say, extra attention, additional information, and the hype surrounding Greenland was not related to security issues. It was connected to the fact that when the United States analyzes the risks to its economy from economic confrontation with China, it realizes that the greatest point of dependence is rare earth elements, which are found in China. And if you look at the world map, after China, the largest deposits of rare earth elements are in Greenland.
At the same time, Donald Trump himself keeps repeating, like a mantra, the thesis that the security of the region is simply impossible without the United States.
Greenland is a vast territory practically uninhabited. This territory is completely unprotected, and it is located at a strategic point where there's a conflict of interests between the US, Russia, and China. And I'm not even talking here about mineral resources, because it's not about rare earth metals, since to access these resources, you would have to drill through hundreds of feet of ice. We don't need this land for mineral resources, we need it for strategic issues of international and national security.
Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen, who obviously also knows the details of the conversation between Trump and Rutte, supported the preliminary agreement between the US and NATO, and stated that the North Atlantic Alliance fully represents Denmark's position. She said that any political issues can be discussed, including matters of security, investment, and the economy, but the sovereignty of a country is not up for discussion. Trump, by the way, also stated himself that the US is not considering a military takeover of Greenland.
There is a position of unity among the majority of European countries regarding support for Denmark on the issue of Greenland. There are highly detailed and strategic proposals currently emerging from NATO regarding the necessity of significantly bolstering and enhancing the comprehensive territorial defense infrastructures of Greenland. Taking everything into consideration, I believe that, well, surely all of these various factors combined together in this specific context will probably inevitably result in the unfortunate circumstance where, for now, yes, we will be facing a formal refusal of the request.
At the same time, while Trump is considering Greenland as a strategic objective to strengthen national security, Russia already controls most of the Arctic region, according to experts. Moscow owns half of the land above the Arctic Circle and accounts for 2/3 of the region's GDP, according to CNN analysts. Europe is well aware of this, which is why the EU's position is that it is necessary to negotiate with America, not ignore it, even after such ambiguous statements from Donald Trump.
And European countries, well, in particular, the former Prime Minister of the Netherlands, now NATO Secretary Mark Rutte, are taking a more conciliatory approach and are ready to seek compromises with the United States of America. This is because in many circles, including liberal ones and those that support Ukraine, there is, so to speak, no vision of the possibility of an autonomous Europe, an autonomous secure European system without the US nuclear umbrella.
Apparently, as part of the bargaining, Denmark may transfer control over part of Greenland to the US for military bases. This is reported by the New York Times, citing its own sources. Top NATO officials are allegedly considering such a compromise, comparing it to the United Kingdom's military bases in Cyprus, which are considered British territory. However, neither the United States nor Denmark has officially commented on this information so far.
Greenland crisis shake the Europe. EU reconsiders life without US backing. The political storm around Greenland is forcing Europe to rethink its future and its security without relying on Washington. Donald Trump has sent a clear signal to the world. He is ready to take Greenland at any cost. This is no longer just rhetoric. For the EU, it's a wake-up call. Can Europe protect its interests on its own? Is this the moment Brussels starts preparing for a future without America as a guarantor? Stay with us, details ahead.
The political crisis surrounding the island of Greenland has made the EU reconsider how to move forward without America's support. Donald Trump made it clear to the whole world that he is determined to take the island at any cost.
If we don't go in there, Russia and China will. Denmark won't be able to do anything about it, but we can do everything.
The US president's threat to impose tariffs on any country that tries to prevent him from seizing Greenland was the last straw for the EU's patience. This is reported by the American publication Politico.
But for many European governments, including America's oldest and most loyal allies, Trump's threat to impose punitive tariffs on anyone who tries to stop him from seizing Greenland was the last straw. They believe that a breakup is now inevitable. In private conversations, concerned European officials called Trump's hasty decision to annex sovereign Danish territory madness and delusion. Politico.
It seems that Europe is ready to create a new alliance instead of NATO without the US, but with Ukraine. Ukraine can play a vital role in this defense alliance due to its size, the geographic location of its defense industry, and the fact that it is already fighting and has invaluable experience.
Ukraine will be key to Europe's defense, primarily because of its technological base, particularly its well-established production of top-class drones and the presence of the largest army in Europe. Juraj Maitson, military analyst.
For example, the United Kingdom, France, the Scandinavian and Baltic countries, Poland, Germany, and Italy spent most of Trump's second term working as part of an effective group without America, the so-called Coalition of the Willing. And this could become the beginning of a defense alliance between Ukraine and Europe.
The Coalition of the Willing was initially focused on issues concerning Ukraine. It created very close ties between certain key people in the capitals. They were building trust and the ability. Cooperation. They know each other by name, and it's easy to contact and send messages. If we include the military might of Ukraine, as well as that of France, Germany, Poland, and the United Kingdom, the potential armed force of a coalition of the willing is enormous and will include both nuclear and non-nuclear states. Politico.
Europe currently buys all of Ukraine's weapons from the United States, and Ukraine in turn has the largest combat-ready army in Europe. Therefore, a new military alliance without the United States is entirely possible, given that the threat from Russia will not disappear even after a possible peace agreement.
Ukraine has friends who understand the nature of Russian aggression as a common problem. With them, we can try to create defensive alliances. Tactically, we can attempt to form regional unions, for example with the Baltic countries, Poland, other Central European states, and the United Kingdom. This would be a temporary and not very stable means of pursuing our strategic interests, but it is possible and necessary to look for other options for defense alliances. Anatoly Kruglasov, political scientist.
The question of the EU needing to defend itself without US support has been discussed for a long time. In recent days, there have been numerous initiatives and bold headlines coming out of Brussels, and the coalition of those willing to support Ukraine could be the beginning of the creation of a new defensive alliance. Officially, the EU has decided to ensure its self-defense by 2030, but under the conditions of war, this decision could be made much sooner.
That's all for today on Ukraine Today. If you want facts, not propaganda, support our work. Like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, subscribe to stay informed, stay strong, stay informed, and stay with Ukraine.